Right. Hello, everyone. I'm Steve Jorson with Northeast Metro Climate Action. We are a volunteer-run community group in the northeast corner of the Twin Cities. We have members, our core members are in White Bear Lake, North Oaks, Vadnais Heights, North St. Paul, and Shoreview. Our mission is to raise awareness about the climate crisis by doing events like this, where we do outreach to the community with different speakers. And we also work with our local governments and state governments to enact climate-friendly policies. And tonight's speakers, Chris Frederick and Paul Gardner, will be talking about how they've upgraded their homes to be very energy efficient in a couple of different angles at that. I'd like to point out always that, what Paul and Chris have done would fall into the category of individual action, which is really important for addressing the climate crisis. We need to attack it from many different angles. Individual action is a very important part of that. A bigger piece is going to need to be on a system-wide basis. We've seen that even like during the pandemic, when everybody stopped driving and flying and taking cruises, we only reduced our carbon emissions by about 7%. And that's because our economies are built on fossil fuel for the most part. We're doing a transition, and we need to accelerate that transition. And a work like Chris and Paul have done on their own homes have really led the way in showing our policymakers just how efficient a home can be in Minnesota, and some of the learnings that they've had, some of the discoveries that they've had in doing so, we can use in building codes and in policy to set the for the future in building new homes and for renovating homes, and just to see how efficient homes can be. And of course, in our polar vortex week and a half here of Minnesota winter, you can see how important it is to have really good efficiency, and because we still have very cold winters for at least for a few weeks out of the year. Our winters are warming faster than our summers, but obviously we can still get some cold weather, and these types of efficiency improvements really help in maintaining keeping a continuous energy supply, so to keep everybody warm. I'll take this opportunity to introduce Paul Gardner. Paul lives in Shoreview. He was a state representative for that district from 2006 to 2010, when they did pass the Next Generation Energy Act under Governor Pawlenty at the time. So he was part of that, and now he is the administrator for the Clean Water Council, and is going to tell us about his home in Shoreview. So go ahead, Paul.
Great, thank you. I will speak slowly so that anyone who needs to tell me that I am talking without being muted, I should speak up. Let's see. Trying to figure out which screen I shared. There we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul Gardner. I live in Shoreview. I know many of you on the call. Some of you were my constituents and helpers when I was in the Minnesota House of Representatives from 2007 to 2010. That worked out really well for renewable energy. But I'd like to tell you about a little case study of what we've done at our house, which was built in 1971. I do want to say at the outset, though, that I have been frustrated at the messaging about how to reduce your carbon footprint over the last couple of years from all places, podcasts and radio shows and presentations and op-eds and things like that, because what you're usually told is, A, you should all be worried to death because it's an existential crisis, which is what I know already. Second, you sometimes get a laundry list of things that you should do without much detail on how to accomplish them, or that you have such a long list of things that you're paralyzed into inaction because you're not really sure where to start first. And I'm a linear thinker, for better or worse, and it really helps when I try and tackle an issue and look at the details and think about how to figure it out. So I'd like to share our experience. It is in no way meant to be what everyone should copy. Your situation is different. Where you're at economically, how long you're going to have your house still, how steep your roof is. I mean, there are all sorts of variables for whether or not some of the things Chris and I are going to share are going to be useful. But I hope that through our example, you can see where we're trying some things and moving forward. And there we go. Now, I know this group talks a lot about policy and what's the right mix between individual action and policy. I'm very fortunate in that I got to be a policymaker, albeit for a short time. And we passed by a wide bipartisan margin and with Governor Palente's signature, the Next Generation Energy Act. And the keystone to that was to require our utilities to use 25% renewable electricity by 2025. And they have met that goal 7 years early. And as you can see from these charts from Fresh Energy, we actually managed to reduce our carbon emissions from the electricity sector while our economic growth went up, which is pretty amazing considering that little dip there with the Great Recession in 2009. And on the right, you can see we're actually ahead of the nation when it comes to reducing our CO2 emissions from the electricity sector, at least through 2016. And that's the only area where we are on target at the moment to meet our state climate change goals. So thank you very much for those of you who helped me get there to cast that vote. You played a big role in that because they only won by 51 votes, not much. So policy does work, but there are some policies which create opportunities for us. Policy can't do everything. There are individual decisions that have to be made where policy opens the door, but we have to actually walk through it. And it is a little troubling to me that more of us aren't. But here goes. So here are some caveats and context here that I thought would be useful. I don't want to be preachy, but I will say one preachy thing at the end in the highlighted part. So my daughter was the, she was an organizer of the Sunrise Movement at Grinnell College, where she went to school. My wife and I went there as well, not recently, but a long time ago. And she was very active in organizing on climate. And so she continues to inform me of things that make me feel a little out of date. I first heard about climate change from Senator Al Gore in his book, Earth in the Balance, which I still have, when he was running for president in 1988. We have come a long way. But in one source that my daughter showed me, which is the United Nations Environmental Program Emission Gap Report, which tells us whether we're on target for our climate change goals, it said the top 1% of the richest 1% of people on the planet create 15% of emissions. Okay, and my daughter is wanting to be admitted, so let's pretend we're not talking about her. Oh, that's okay. I'm just saying, let's talk about her. No, I'm kidding. She hates it when I do that. So she showed me information that the top 1% are responsible for 15% of emissions. And I thought, oh, yes, well, Bill Gates and Warren Buffett and people like that are jetting around in their private jets, which is really wasteful. That makes sense. And then I looked at the fine print and it said that the global 1% earn more than $109,000 a year. Oxfam has a different number of $145,000 a year. And my wife and I don't make 109,000, but my wife and I together do. And so we're probably, I guess, in the top 2 or 3% of all income earners in the world. I never would have thought that, but that means that we are doing things that you and I think are as normal here in the burbs. Some of us are responsible for more emissions through things that we think are normal. Air travel will blow your carbon budget right away. There's an assumption that each licensed driver in the house will have a vehicle. We have more living space than most people do on the planet, less density here in the Twin Cities in particular. Our fridge and freezer are full, including with beef, which is really terrible for climate. And we tend to purchase more stuff, which has carbon embedded in it. And so when you add all that stuff up, suddenly those of us who have the ability to live that life are responsible for more carbon emissions than we think. On the flip side, she also showed me information about the bottom 50% of income earners in the world are creating 10 to 15% of emissions. And I think a lot of people tend to scapegoat the poorest people in the world, saying, you better not improve your quality of life because you'll make it worse for us. When in fact, those of us who can, should, in fact, must decarbonize a lot faster because we're responsible for more emissions in the first place. Okay, that's my preaching part. So here we are with our case study. Our house is now 50 years old. It is 2,000 square feet. It seems modest to us, but by global standards, I guess it's quite good. Finished basement. And what we've done here is made some energy efficiency changes. We put in a heat pump, solar PV system. We have one electric vehicle, hopefully another in the next couple of years. We've electrified a few other things. And just for virtue signaling, I'll tell you, we did some stuff for water quality, like our rain garden in the front yard here. This looks like early June based on what's blooming here. So buildings, just to break down our emissions here into wedges, if you've ever seen those charts with wedges in them. Buildings, I'm told, make up 40% of our carbon emissions in the United States. So that's building buildings, demolishing buildings, powering buildings, and heating and cooling buildings. The larger the building, usually the easier it is to get economies of scale, to do things like a retrofit to make that building less carbon intensive. So the best example I could find, just your typical building, the Empire State Building in Midtown Manhattan, is now emitting 40% less carbon than it did 10 years ago because of retrofits with the heating and cooling and electrical systems, as well as windows. And so they saw a payback that was very quick. They're saving $4 million a year, and they're getting a payback period that's twice as quick as they thought they were going to have. Closer to home, the Mounds View School District, 10 years ago, they worked with a consultant to upgrade a few systems, but also do behavior change with administrators, staff, teachers, and students to reduce energy usage. And they saved $500,000 in less than 15 months. And those benefits continue to accumulate. And the school district just finished putting its 13th solar PV system on its schools, and they're going to save money without upfront costs. And Chris, I know you had everything to do with that. Way to go.
There's a big number of panels on our building where I work. Yes, it's very
Great.
nice.
So what about residential buildings? I have to tell you, I'm a little frustrated because if you're looking for examples of homes that are net zero energy, meaning they produce as much energy as they use, you are usually directed to some new homes, which I will say are really cool, but they are really expensive. And while I may be in the top 2 or 3% globally, I'm not going to afford a house that's $1 million. Tear down an old building, build a new one, work with an architect and a contractor, and essentially put my life on hold for a year while it's built. They are neat though. Mark Sloot, who I've met from Sala Architects, did this house called Ohm Sweet Ohm. Get it? A name you can't resist. Okay, I can't hear the gasps. So there are a lot of really great examples of homes like this, but for most people, more than half of Minnesotans, our homes have been built before the first energy code in the state in 1976. So we need to find examples where people have done something that we can access and get closer to net zero energy. Oops, boy, I'm gonna foul it up now. I just spoiled the surprise. So if you do some deep diving to research how people have done what they call a deep retrofit to boost energy efficiency and do renewable energy, They have this logical series of steps that you should take, and they usually mean that you should just put your life on hold again for months while you do this, which most people can't do. Usually it's get an energy audit. Chris will talk about his experience with that soon. Then you seal up the building envelope and you make sure you have adequate ventilation. You electrify your heating and cooling system, and then you go solar. And it's done. However, our experience and how it usually happens for us is that we kind of stumble into it. We can't do it all at once. And our philosophy at our house is if it ain't broke, don't fix it, at least not yet. And if it is broke, replace it with something greener. And before it breaks, especially if it's a critical system like heating, do some research ahead of time so that when you do need to take action and do it quickly, you know exactly what you're looking for and who you're going to work with. We did not have a plan for what I'm going to describe to you. We just kind of stumbled into it, but eventually we came up with a long-term plan where we're checking things off the list as they break. As every homeowner knows, if you're in a home long enough, things break. And if there are things like deadlines, like tax credit deadlines, those are important things to keep track of. So reality is on the right, ideals are on the left. So how did we get into doing this? Something broke. So after a polar vortex winter in 2014, when we had a large snowpack that melted very quickly, followed by heavy rains, our sump pump, which I thought was running fine, decided that it wasn't going to run every 10 minutes, and it seized up on a Sunday night at 10 o'clock. And my wife said, "There's water on the floor." And then we proceeded to get a new sump pump first thing in the morning, and I pumped it out, and it looked like this gusher here. And then we had ruined carpet and pad, and anything in a cardboard box on the floor was pretty much ruined. And I never want to have to deal with that again. State Farm sent me a nice letter with some tough love, and they said, "We'll pay for this, but you need to do something to avoid water getting into your foundation. And if you don't, we might drop you as a customer. And we're only going to do this once." And actually, it was a really nice letter, by the way. But that meant that we needed to improve some of our drainage work. And we had also put off some things. We had a sewer pipe that was clogged with tree roots. We were paying Roto-Rooter a couple of $100 every year in the winter to drill out our sewer pipes so that we could flush the toilet. Not a good long-term solution. So we knew we had to dig up the front yard. We needed to regrade our yard so water moved away from the house. We put in that rain garden, or we were planning to, which helps with our drainage. And by the way, our furnace and our air conditioner were really at the end of their useful lives. So I thought, well, if we're going to do a home equity line of credit here to make some home repairs, and we're going to dig up the yard anyway, why not consider something particularly green? So we settled on a ground sourced heat pump. There are things called open loop systems, which I don't think are allowed now, where you might just suck in water from a lake and run it through a heat pump and then have it discharged. I don't think we can do that anymore, but closed loop systems are the thing. This involved, again, digging it up our yard. So we had a well driller drill 180 feet down through 3 borings, and then they put in these coils, which is very high-tech hose that's supposed to last for 50 years. And it circulates ethylene glycol from the house in the heat pump through those borings, like in the vertical loop graph there. And then the constant temperature of the earth is what makes the whole system work. So at our latitude, it's 47 degrees, I'm told. So if you run ethylene glycol through those closed loops, you get fluid that enters the heat pump at 47 degrees. And I'm no physicist to explain it, but I'll try. The heat pump then compresses that fluid and exchanges the heat in the hose into the air, warmer than it came in. And so that's how you're able to go from 47 degrees and heat up the house to about 68, which is where we usually are, instead of taking air that's at 0 degrees like it is now and heating it up with a gas furnace to 65 or 70 degrees. So you're making the work easier. For air conditioning, the opposite works here. You take warm air in the house, the heat pump exchanges that into the fluid that goes back into the ground. It chills it again at 47 degrees, comes back in the house and evaporates that 47 degree heat through an exchanger, and suddenly you have cooler air. You can do a horizontal ground sourced heat pump if you have some acreage. So if you've got one of those 2-acre lots in Lino Lakes that they still have out there, and you're not messing with trees or a septic field, it's actually cheaper if you do it that way, where you get a backhoe instead of a well driller and dig about 10 feet down and lay this hose down. I've got a lot of stuff here just for reference because you're probably going to keep this, and so I'm not going to read through all of it, but the basic efficiency you get here from a ground source heat pump is your natural gas use really just goes away. Our total household natural gas use dropped by about 80 to 90%. We are still using gas for a dryer, a stove, and a gas fireplace, which we're replacing tomorrow with an electric one. So we'll continue to drop our need for fossil fuels. If you look at the graph on the right, in the center, it says gas in therms by year. You can see the peaks from 2013 and 14 in the winter months, in the colder parts of the year. That was our natural gas use before getting the ground source heat pump. And all subsequent years, late 2014 and to the present, our natural gas use has been almost zero. And that's just the stove, the dryer, and the fireplace. You can see that it's not really any higher in the winter. We do have a backup furnace, but to be honest, it almost never runs. The only time it's run during this cold snap was yesterday for about 10 minutes. And so I really wonder if we needed it. But it creates cheap hot water. We do have a system that heats our water. So you're not seeing a real bump in our winter gas use because of that. In the summer, it is really efficient. The further south you go in the US, the smarter this system is. We can cool the house for less than $1 a day in the summer. Xcel Energy does require you to have a separate meter because they want to be able to control it. It's like a saver switch, except it's permanent. And so they can shut it off anytime that they need to at peak demand, although I don't know if they've ever done it. But we get charged 40% less per kilowatt hour for that separate meter. And so that's what saves us some money. There are some fun things about this system. It creates constant temperature in the rooms that you're in. There are no hot spots and cold spots. It's the same everywhere. And it's really disorienting for a few weeks, and then you get used to it. But we are using electricity in the winter. You can see in the graph in the upper right where we're peaking with our kilowatt hour use for electricity for the heat pump, and only a little bump in June, July, and August. That's how efficient it is for air conditioning. Just some lessons learned here. The downside to a ground source heat pump actually is the expense. You can see on one of the lower bullet points, the whole kit and caboodle, which included the separate meter, the gas backup furnace, the vertical loop work, or the horizontal, or shoot, the well drilling for the vertical loop, everything together was $27,000. We got 30% of that back very quickly from a federal tax credit, a little bit from Xcel for rebates, not a whole lot, but then we have that lower electrical cost on the separate meter. If we were to do this again, and then we had the technology we have now with air source heat pumps, I might consider that first. Chris has got great experience with that, but they're obviously cheaper, and they are getting better at operating at very cold temperatures. If you want to do radiant heat in your floor, underfloor heating, heat pumps are extremely effective. And if you have more acres to do the horizontal loop, it's cheaper to pay a guy with a backhoe than a well drilling rig. One thing we did take out a home equity loan to do that and a variety of other repairs unrelated to this. And we did it's like an adjustable rate mortgage. It's not really a great idea. And I would really suggest working with a lender who knows about energy issues. And the Center for Energy and Environment in Minneapolis was extremely good to work with for our solar later. And I would work with them again in a minute for something like a heat pump. I've got information there on the vendor. Happy to talk about that at another time. Chris is going to talk about the energy audit side of things. I should have done this first, but we did seal some leaks. You can see some canister lights in our old bathroom that were just sucking air right out of the house. We replaced some entry doors, sealed the leaks in the attic, but there are things we put off because, again, they're not broken. We have double pane windows that are sufficient according to the energy auditor we got from Excel. And he's just said, there's no reason you should buy new windows unless you really want new windows, because you're just doing fine. So using their home energy rating system now, the HERS score, which is on a 100-point basis, we got 100 because of all the things that we're doing. It doesn't mean we could do like 120 if that such a scale existed by doing some extra stuff, but we're going to wait till something breaks. We did go solar in September last year. There seem to be 3 or 4 leading vendors now that are very reputable and on schedule and on budget. I have heard of people talking with vendors who don't communicate very well. I thought Cedar Creek was great. There are a couple others. The payback for this is 10 years, and in theory, it will power 95% of our energy needs. And this is kind of our retirement plan. We think we'll be making money off solar and geothermal by the time we pay off the house and retire. We had a substantial federal tax credit. It was supposed to go down to 22% this year from 26, but it was extended another 2 years. And we're going to get some solar rewards payment from Excel at about $8,000 over a 10-year period. We are partially shaded, and the pitch of our roof is not that great, as you can see. And I would make this suggestion to you if you're thinking about solar, and that would be to get the largest system that Excel will let you have. The reason for this is you get greater economies of scale. We were first quoted a price, and I'm just going to be blunt with you. They gave us vendors gave us an estimate of $20,000 to put up 15 panels. And it wouldn't power 95% of our needs. And I thought, well, I want to get as close to net zero as I can. What if we made it as big as we can? Would that make a difference? And it turns out it did. So if we doubled the number of power panels, we doubled the amount of energy production, but the price only went up by 50%. And that is because you pay the same price whether you have 1 panel or 50 for an inverter. That's going to be the same price. Permits, engineering, inspections, those are all going to be the same cost. And the electrical work. Adding additional panels is a lot cheaper. So that is my suggestion to you, is if you were able to finance the largest system you can, you should do it. We do have some things left to do, waiting for them to break. So I'm trying to convince my wife that when our stove breaks, that we should get an induction cooktop and a convection oven. I think would be a pretty radical change for how we cook. We have a dryer. I know you all were dissing dryers recently. I need a dryer, but you can get a heat pump dryer. They're getting cheaper and there are more models available. They tend to take longer to operate, but I hear that people love the quality of the drying. And we're getting rid of our gas fireplace, going electric starting tomorrow. I asked about insulation with the auditor, and he said, you have sufficient 50-year-old insulation in your building cavity, but if you really hate your siding or you want to get rid of it, our 50-year-old siding, that would be the time to add in other insulation, including rigid foam. And then finally, all of our outdoor equipment is electrified, like a lawnmower and a blower, even a chainsaw, but we still have a gas snow blower. So when that breaks, I'm getting this sucker right here, this 2-stage Ego model, which uses batteries that I've used from my other stuff. So I'm going to end it there and let Chris go, and then I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right, so thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. One of the things I forgot to mention in my intro was if you have questions for Paul or Chris, write them in the chat, and then we will. I will ask them at the end. Hopefully, we'll have about 10 to 15 minutes for questions. Looks like we'll have about 10 minutes for questions, and which is fine. And so with that, I'll introduce Chris Frederick. Ran for State House in District 38A. He is a technology specialist with the Mountain View School District. He was a patent attorney for Honeywell for many years, and he's a bicycle commuter. And he has done a lot of work on his home as well. And we'll hear from Chris. So Chris, if you want to take it away.
Well, thanks. It's great to be here and to have the chance to speak about some of the stuff that we've done with our house. Like Paul, we had an interest in making some changes, and our house happens to be from 1991. And we, throughout some time, made some improvements, but I wanted to talk a little bit here today on focusing more on the data behind making environmental changes or trying to upgrade things in your house. A lot of our work actually started when we did a kitchen renovation. And in that renovation process, we found out about the Minnesota Green Star program. And this is back in 2013, which as part of the remodeling process is a program that is similar to a LEED certification, where we went through a series of checklists, which I'll cover in a minute here, and found ways to increase the efficiency of our home. And as part of that process, we got a certification that we could hopefully use to increase, number one, our environmental footprint and the resale value in our house. It also made sure our contractor was doing the right things. And that was a big kind of driver for my wife and I, is that we wanted a contractor that would pay attention to this. And we found one that was willing to go through the training and do this. And plus, we thought it was the right thing to do at the end of the day. So we signed up to that process as part of it, which was a lot bigger and a lot more involved than we expected. And the contractor himself had to go through some training to understand how to administer this program, how to get things reviewed. It did involve a lot of paperwork. It involved us making some changes to some of our appliances and some things on our property as well. And I'll cover some of those in a few minutes. We did have to come up with some additional plans, for example, for disposing of construction waste and things like that in the process, and then conducting some tests on our homes, our home. And I'll cover that because working at Honeywell, I worked with a research lab, and they focused quite a bit on energy reduction. And that kind of instilled in me the need to measure and to monitor things as part of this process. So we started that, and the very first thing we came across was a gigantic spreadsheet. More paperwork. Fortunately, the contractor was the person to manage this, but the spreadsheet was fantastic in that it was very, very detailed. It provided a lot of information on how we could make changes to our home, or what things we could consider as part of the process. And this is just a small snapshot of that spreadsheet. It's far too large to post or to even go through in one setting. But in here, we found ideas, for example, to take things like our air ducts for our bathroom exhaust fans and find out if those ducts were made out of a rigid ductwork or whether they're just some type of flexible ducting. And one of ours actually needed to be replaced as part of the process. And when they were in the process of working in the attic and doing things as part of this remodeling effort, we were able to specify the changes that we wanted to make. And the way we went about this is looking at the entire sheet. There's a lot of opportunity for improving things, helping our footprint and generally making our space a little bit better in terms of the environment, but it all came at a cost. And so we focused on those areas that we could have the greatest impact, which was in terms of points at the least amount of cost for us. But there were a significant number of changes we had to make to satisfy the Green Star Gold certification. So we started, one of the things we added to the house was solar panels, an obvious choice. But as part of the process, I needed a way to understand how these panels were performing. This is a 2.1 kilowatt system, which is not that large, partially shaded, but we put it up anyway, and we actually got some pretty good performance out of it. At times, I could achieve at least 2 kilowatts out of it. And the way I determined that, we have an inverter in the garage, which has some information on it, telling us how it's converting it to 120 volts for our use in the house. But at the same time, I actually built a website that would display the data because I thought there was a need for my family to consume the data and make changes to their lifestyle. So I built a website that would monitor the solar panel output, what the current load was of the house, and whether we were selling electricity back to Xcel Energy or whether we were buying additional energy to meet our needs. Those three numbers were pretty understandable by our kids. And then I made if we were selling electricity back, I made that number green. So that was the goal for the kids, is to keep that number in the green. And that tended to work. But our kids got older and I had a need for more data. So I went back, installed something called an E-Gauge energy monitoring system in our circuit breaker panel or box. That has a connection to the internet and allowed me to install some current transformers on individual circuits in my house. So that would allow me, for example, to see what my dishwasher was consuming for power. It would also allow me to see what my panels were putting out, and it would allow me to monitor things like the heat pump that we also put in. And we have an air-sourced heat pump, which means we get most of our heat from what looks like a large air conditioner outside our house. And it works both as an air conditioner and as a heating source. And when it generates heat, it provides a very small amount of increased heat to our house, but it runs a lot longer than our gas furnace does. And like Paul, we also have a gas furnace as a backup, which has run in the very cold weather now. But our heat pump will actually extract heat from the air down to about 12 degrees Fahrenheit. So well below freezing. And we can set that too for efficiency. But these current transformers gave me a way to start to measure individual circuits in our house. And one of the other circuits that I wanted to measure was our electric car charging, because I wanted to know how much I was spending on electricity for that car each month. So I had 10 circuits I chose, and I chose the ones that are probably the highest consuming circuits in our house, or that I could have some control or effect over. The E-Gauge gave us a graph, and it told us what we were consuming, and you could graph it by day, by week, by month, things like that. This happens to be for the last 1 month period. I just pulled this graph, and you'll notice a couple of things. We got solar power in the winter with our panels, but in the last week or so, we've had snow on our panels. And so we can see that we are not generating anywhere near as much power as we would like to generate. The second thing that this showed us is that they told us in the winter, your panels will be more efficient and actually generate more power. That wasn't true, because we have more sunlight in the summer and our panels would generate more power because of the increased number of sunlight hours. And we could see that data here. In this graph, I could also turn on things like our dishwasher and see where that was consuming the most power. And you can also see spikes in this graph because of my car charging. And the car charging and our oven take the most electricity in our house. And our house is almost all electric except for a tankless water heater, which is gas. So like Paul, we have almost no gas cost going forward. One of the other things in the Green Star certification was to find out if our home is leaking, like Paul had done. So we had a blower door test done where they put a big tarp up on your front door and increase the pressure in your house with a big fan. And then they look for leaks through things like some of the access to the attic, and maybe some cracks near your ceiling on your walls and things like that. They actually found that our attic access point, which was in our upstairs hallway, was leaking. And so we found a very simple way to fix that with some additional insulation, just a foam insulation strip around the opening of that. So a couple of bucks actually caused our home to be a little bit tighter and leak a little bit less in the summer and the winter. One of the things they did, in addition to checking the thermal images that Paul had shown, was to give us a report. And this is a snapshot at the beginning of the report. And that report told us what we wanted to know, which again is more data about our house. Does it need sealing? Are we leaking, or is it actually too tight? And one of the questions that came up in the Green Star certification was, do you have enough fresh air intake into your house? So if you have a furnace, for example, that draws air in, if you seal your home up too much, it can, and you need the air, it actually can take it back from the furnace and cause carbon monoxide poisoning and other things. We have a sealed combustion chamber in our furnace, so it actually gets fresh air from the outside of the house. But we also have an exhaust fan in the kitchen. So when we burn something on the stove, we turn the exhaust fan on, which vents outside the house, and it could drop the pressure in the house. So we thought we were at a pretty good point from this graph, and we moved on to other things. They also have you test for radon, odorless gas, I guess, that collects in the lower levels of your house. Pretty simple test where you open a packet, leave it for a couple of days, I think, seal it up, and then mail it off to be analyzed. I understand there's uranium or things like that in the soil that can leak into your house and can cause things like lung cancer and stuff like that. So as part of the Green Star certification, we had to run tests like this. So it was reassuring to find out that our house from 1991 was actually not experiencing a high level of radon. And we had to run that test, I think, a couple of times. And this is one of the results, one set of results we had gotten back. So I needed more data. So then I decided to tackle the next project, which was to take the utility bills that we're getting and try to collect that data and analyze it to see if I could discern anything from what was provided from Excel and from, in our case, Centennial Utilities for natural gas. And I started a spreadsheet. And I basically copied some of the information from the utility bill to find out, for example, how much electricity we're using each month. And then I could see changes when we replaced our furnace and heat pump, and I could see changes when we added solar panels, and I could see changes through small tweaks that we made to our house. I could also compare month to month. For example, if November was 20 degrees on average, and they put the averaged air temperature on your invoice, and February was 20 degrees, were we actually performing better in one of the 2 months in terms of electricity usage? And I would look at the total on the bill, and I realized that wasn't giving me an accurate comparison because you have different days in each month. And some months require more heat and some months require less. And so I found out about measuring heating degree days and cooling degree days, which gave us a picture of how much it took to heat your residence in that month, or how much it took to cool your residence that month. And so using that information, which is available online, I started to normalize the data. So I divided the kilowatt hours of electricity used by the number of degree days in that month. And then you could get a more accurate comparison of whether your electricity usage was going up or down, which also would tell me things like if something is not performing, such as if the furnace is not performing because we had a problem with our blower on it at one point. And so you can detect that by monitoring some of the data that you get in your utility bills. I went on from there, even though this wasn't part of the Green Star certification process, and I wanted to track my car and I wanted to compare it with other options for traveling to work. So I did some rough calculations, used information from the e-gauge system that tracks our electricity usage for the circuit that the car uses, and I was able to monitor how much electricity was being used and how much it was costing me. And it turns out it's costing me more in insurance to insure my car than the electricity cost. But the average cost for driving my car, which is about, I think it's a 90 kilowatt hour pack in my car, is about $69 a month. Far cheaper than using a gas car, but nowhere near what I could get with an electric bike. And so I ended up switching and commuting to work by electric bike. Plus, it's a lot more fun and takes up less space in my garage for parking. But we still have the car. But I like to monitor now the charging of the electric bike, which takes almost no electricity. And then I graph that as well, so you can see the variance over the year. It does take me more electricity to charge my car and drive my car in the winter because it also heats the battery pack and the cabin of the car. So I found out that the air conditioner was much more efficient than the heater in the car. At the same time, I also added things like temperature sensors to our house to find out if there was a variance between levels in our house. And I found that in general, there wasn't a significant variance in our house here, but we experienced it a little bit different between the basement and the upper level of our house, but it wasn't too significant for us. So putting sensors and monitoring things throughout the year in various locations, that's all given us data that we can take action on and use. And then lastly, the Green Star certification had us doing a lot of things to get that the gold status that we wanted. We ended up doing some things that cost us very little money, such as adding compost bin. The compost bin used worm composting, which we purchased from Amazon. You can actually buy a box of worms from Amazon and use that to compost. We started to work on a bee-friendly landscape in our lawn with clover and things like that. We also, again, started commuting by bike. we started taking our extra compost that we didn't put in the worm composting bin to drop off in the city compost. But it's small things like this. Even I think we paid for a community garden for a couple of years and grew our own vegetables and things there, just to again get additional points and have a bigger effect on our footprint. And then lastly, we've been offsetting our carbon footprint since about 2012 through carbon credits, which I'm not particularly happy about. I'd actually rather reduce the amount of carbon generated in the first place. But these are all extra steps that we've tried to take to have some effect on this. And if I can measure any of it along the way, I certainly will. Again, the data is useful, if not only for my benefit, but also for my family's benefits and kids to follow. They can see the information and then take action based on it. So thanks. I think we are going to go to questions.
Yeah, so Paul, you said you wrote down some questions and you wanted to answer those?
Sure. There was a couple of questions, or a question related to the ground source heat pump. One was why 3 borings, and that is really just based on calculations on how much heating and cooling capacity we needed for our size house. There are different sized heat pumps, and they're really unexciting to look at. It's just this metal box in my laundry room that's 2.5 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet. And there are ones that are probably 3 feet by 3.5 by 3.5 feet. I mean, they're just different sizes and powers and the like. So for a single family house of our size, 3 borings was probably good. I do know that some newer homes, newer than ours, probably are tight enough that you could pull things off with an air source heat pump. I think, Chris, your house is probably built in the late 80s and early 90s, something like that.
1991, yes.
Okay. I walked every one of those streets in 4 campaigns, so I started to figure it out. So that's why they did 3. It's not actually a well, it's just a boring. There were 2 questions about shading and east-west orientation of panels. When I first thought about solar 5 years ago, the solar developers just looked at our house on Google Earth and said, don't even bother. I mean, you could produce electricity, but it won't be that great. You won't get that many solar rewards from Excel. But we did have one ash tree that we had to have removed that was really close to the house, and it was leaning, and it's an ash tree. It's going to go sooner or later. So we did get rid of that, and that made the difference. We actually have solar panels that face in 3 directions, one on our south facing roof. There's a couple on our west facing roof of the garage, and there's 10, I think, on the east facing garage. So at any time during the day, we will not have direct sunlight on all 30 panels. Over the course of the day, the east side will charge, and then the ones on the south side, and then late in the day, it'll be the east side. So it just depends. And the vendors now have very sophisticated tools to estimate what kind of solar radiation you're going to get, including what your trees are like. And that's how they determined, yeah, we need to take that tree out if we're going to make it work. And I needed to remove it anyway. It was broke, so we fixed it.
We actually asked our neighbor about removing their tree that was blocking part of our panels, and they declined. But we started to graph it then and found out that that tree was only blocking the panels in the morning, and it would have a slight dip in the graph, and you could see that. But then by afternoon, it would hit the peak solar generation and then continue throughout the rest of the day.
Right. And even, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, we have a whole house or a single inverter for our whole panel, our panels that are up there, which means if any of them are shaded, it lowers the efficiency overall. But you can get micro inverters that are tied to each panel, and it generates electricity based on just that panel. So if you have a couple that are shaded, the drop is much less.
And everyone has an app now for their solar stuff from all the new systems, and ours showed this right in the middle of the day when the sun was going to go behind this one tree for a little bit. So we can track it. Somebody asked why Excel limits the size of your PV system. And they say you can't get a system that produces more than 120% of your electrical needs. And I think if you wanted a solar panels in excess of that, you probably wouldn't get the solar rewards payments. But I think Excel has been very progressive on renewable energy, but they know one thing, which is utility scale solar is more cost effective for everybody than lots of home solar systems. That's why people are trying to get you to subscribe to solar gardens, but some of us really want to do it. But there is a limit on the size, and they don't want you turning into a utility of yourself, where a utility by yourself, where you're generating more than you need and distributing it out on the grid. And that's reasonable. You'd have to have a lot of acreage to be able to produce more than we can crank out. I really want to try out the E-Gauge energy monitor that Chris has, because I think we probably could squeeze some more wasted kilowatts out of our house. The cheapest energy to produce is the energy you never produce at all. Kelsey asked about ethylene glycol and potential toxicity. I don't know the answer, and now you've scared me, and I'm going to stay awake all night looking that up, Kelsey. Thank you.
Kelsey also had a question about if this is a good one for both Paul and Chris. Which modifications that you made would you say are the most important to add to building codes and regulations?
I think you ought to have a home energy audit. I think that should be required before you do anything. That was a kind of an eye-opening experience for us. And we were able to fix things at very low cost too in the process.
I would agree that it's $100, I think, if you do the blower test. My guess is you will make that back instantly. And you know, those of us who think we're educated about this topic are always surprised when the energy audit shows that we're wrong. I thought we had sealed all the leaks with a previous insulator vendor, and they did not do it well. And so we also, as part of our big project, replace our shingles. And so the roofer went up into the roof and said, boy, you've got a lot of moisture up here. And so we had Excel come out and figure out where the leaks were, had a real insulator figure it out and get it done. And I know that we had the issue because then we had a ventilation issue in our bathroom where we were having some mold, because we knew it had been leaking up into the attic. And then we fixed the ventilation in the bathroom, so it all worked out. But yeah, always do the audit first. That gives you a catalog of stuff you can do. It helps you develop your long-term plan.
I wouldn't do it. Someone asked how often you should have that done. I wouldn't do it unless you're making changes to your house that are substantial, because I don't think it's going to change very much over time. So if you're adding insulation or something like that, or if you're making renovations to existing walls and changing your house kind of around, then you might want to consider it again. But I think the overall structure of your house will probably stay the same for quite a while.
The question seems to suggest that maybe we ought to advocate for regulations that encourage climate-friendly changes in the building codes. I was just reading an article yesterday about how the natural gas industry is fighting ordinances at the city level to prohibit the use of natural gas in new construction. California is doing some of that, and so they've even infiltrated next door, posing as concerned citizens that they won't be able to cook with gas. I think the more of us that show that we can live without gas, the better. I mean, and newer homes are going to be more efficient than older homes. So if we can, yeah.
Our gas bill is actually the minimum amount required that they have to bill us for. We can't get the bill any lower in most cases. We have an induction cooktop in the kitchen, and I would take that almost any day over gas. So that's a fantastic improvement in terms of kitchen cooktops.
Yeah, and we are making progress. I've read that Ryan Companies that's planning to do the development on the new Ford or the old Ford site down there on West 7th, they may do that development without any natural gas. They're looking at doing that with all electricity. So um, this type of work that, that Chris and Paul have done, to lead the way on this and others to show that we can do heating and cooking and clothes drying without natural gas is really important work that we can use, that policymakers can use and construction companies that are going to develop a whole area like that as well. Great.
The other thing we did as part of the process was subscribe to Excel's wind source program. And I did that. There's a charge for it, I think, at the time that I signed up. And I thought that that was going to be an additional payment I'd have to make every month. But it turns out there were some other charges that were taken off the bill. So the price for using the wind source program was not significant at all. So now I know the electricity, the higher amounts of electricity we're using because of the air source heat pump and charging an electric car and electric cooktop and things like that, it's hopefully offset by that increased wind generation and the PV panels that we've got up.
Hey, Chris.
I'm done.
Just a quick question, Chris. On the wind source, have you looked at the Renew Connect program and compared the cost of that versus wind source?
No, I haven't. And I will after this call. That's the first time I've heard of it.
But I think it's a different portfolio mix of sources. Wind sources just doing wind, and the system, Paul, you're talking about includes solar also.
Yeah.
If you can figure out your Excel bill, they show you, they eliminate your fuel surcharge. So you're paying for the cost of fuel like natural gas or electricity, but then they delete that because you're doing wind. And so, as Chris says, it's not as bad as it looks for expense. Thanks for the links too, Nikki.
So there's a question here, probably for Chris on the air source heat pump. And I'm also curious about this as far as if you currently have a gas furnace and an air conditioner, what's the process for getting an air source heat pump? It's not going to replace your gas furnace, right? How does that work?
No, it doesn't. In fact, it just replaced the air conditioner for us. So when we were making changes, actually, I think we did replace the furnace at the same time because we didn't have a variable speed blower on the furnace, and we wanted something that would blow at the appropriate speed. So the heat pump puts out air that is slightly warmer than your room, but it runs a lot longer at lower speed. So it doesn't blast your house with hot air. It just slowly raises the temperature and keeps it at that right temperature. So I think as you go through the process, if you have to replace your furnace or have to replace your air conditioner, that's the time that you ask. And they'll give you options on that. It was slightly more expensive. I don't remember the cost off the top of my head, but it was an investment we made. And some of the changes we've made, like Paul, we try to make as investments when we need to in the house.
And we shouldn't minimize the need to address the needs of lower income homeowners here also. And there are ways to do that, but those of us who are in the top 5% or whatever, we can decarbonize a heck of a lot faster. And that's our lane. We need to fix our own house, as it were.
One of the big proposals in Biden's clean energy plan is to really help out underserved communities with retrofitting homes, especially older homes that have been, neglected and that can really use an improvement, a retrofit, and that's a big part of that. So, in which way, I mean, that just helps everybody. It reduces energy use and reduces, waste, and it puts money in people's pocket because they're not spending it all on energy every month. It's just all around a great program. Hopefully we can get that through the Senate and get some get some backing on that and get that started. And the other thing, I teach engineers at St. Thomas. They're all excited about retrofitting. It's going to take engineering work to do all of this, You know, there's going to be a lot of jobs out there for retrofitting buildings, figuring out the best way to retrofit homes, and getting all this that type of work done. So it's really a huge boost to our economy. It helps people in need, and it helps people who are looking for jobs, and it helps our environment, of course. You know, the big ticket there. So great stuff all the way around. Did you see any other questions on there that we haven't hit yet?
Yeah, there were a couple. Lincoln asked about replacing single pane windows or replacing old storm windows with new ones. Chris, you replaced your windows, so.
We did actually in the renovation, because it was tied to our kitchen, we changed some of the windows there and where they were located. I wish I could replace all the windows in the house. We still have other windows that probably need to be upgraded. I don't have any data on how much that helped our house, though. That's something that I found more difficult to measure.
What I'm kind of reading as I, stay up late and look up about deep retrofits is that if you do have single pane windows, chances are pretty good you make your money back faster with a window upgrade. If you have double pane windows, the marginal benefit isn't going to be that high. So that's why the energy auditor said your windows are fine. Don't get new windows unless you really want new windows. I have to tell you, I just went to the library today and picked up one of those draft check devices. It kind of looks like the thing you stick in your ear, to take your temperature, except it shines a light on a surface and it tells you what the temperature is. And you can get that for free. And I wanted to see if some of the work, I'd done some caulking on one of my windows here where there was a draft last year. Saw that it worked, but I just shown it on the window and it said it was something like 45 degrees to the touch. And then we have these energy efficient shades that go over it, and it immediately the temperature goes up to 63 degrees. So the window treatment that you have can make a big difference too, in terms of comfort too. This room used to be kind of drafty because of the leaks around the window, and I fixed those and we've got the shades and now it's cozy. So there are smaller things you can do too, not just for energy, but for comfort.
All right, I think that about wraps it up for questions. I think we hit most of them. And again, Paul and Chris, we really appreciate you coming on and talking about your experience with your homes and what we can do in Minnesota. It's inspiring, I think, for all of us to hear how you've done. And I think everybody on here is here to, because they have interest in this and want to know how to get started and what makes the most sense. And I think you've done a really great job of giving us some really good ideas on how to do that, how to get started, and how to make that work. And so thanks again. And we really appreciate, again, your talking to us. And thanks to everyone for logging on and watching our February event. We had 33 people, which is great. Good to see people interested in reducing their carbon footprint and keeping our momentum going here with Northeast Metro Climate Action. And we will have more information out about events in the coming months as well. So thanks again, everyone, and have a good evening.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.